Imagine walking into a room where everyone is performing, but no one realizes it. The posture, the tone, the words chosen like weapons. It's a quiet battle for dominance. You can feel it. People flaunting credentials like armor. Competing not just to be heard, but to win. You see smiles that aren't smiles, laughter that's rehearsed, intelligence used as currency in a social market where ego sets the prices. And then there's someone different, someone who doesn't play. They speak softly, or not at all. They don't correct, don't boast, don't fight for attention. In fact, they let others think they're average, maybe even naive. And here's the twist. They're the sharpest mind in the room, and they know exactly what they're doing. This isn't incompetence. This is strategy, and it's one of the most misunderstood sources of power in human interaction. Why would someone choose to look like a fool in a world obsessed with status, intellect, and performance? Because the person who needs to prove their intelligence is already showing you their weakness. This is what the philosopher Schopenhauer understood, not the motivational, filtered version of life, but the raw psychological terrain most people refuse to look at. He saw society as a theater, a constant performance, everyone auditioning to be seen as clever, successful, superior. And in that performance, the loudest actor usually gets the spotlight, but also the most scrutiny. You walk into a room talking like a genius, and people will look for the crack. That's human nature. But what happens when you play it the other way? When you let them believe you're not a threat? You vanish. You become invisible. And that is where the real power begins. Because when people underestimate you, they stop performing. They expose their assumptions. They reveal their own insecurities. And you get to see them without their mask. Schopenhauer believed that the wisest among us don't announce it. They observe. They listen. They learn. Not to outshine, but to outlast. Think about Socrates. He claimed to know nothing, and through that posture, pulled the truth out of people like a thread. His so-called ignorance wasn't weakness. It was bait. He wasn't hiding his mind. He was using it without making it a spectacle. Or Sun Tzu, the military strategist who taught that the key to victory is deception. Appear weak when you are strong. Appear passive when you are calculating. Because surprise is a more powerful weapon than strength. Now let's apply this to real life. Imagine two co-workers. One constantly talks about their achievements, angles for recognition, make sure the boss hears their effort. The other, quiet, steady, no showmanship, no need to convince. Guess who ends up with the upper hand? The one who never entered the race in the first place. Because when your value doesn't depend on attention, your moves are made from strength, not desperation. This isn't manipulation. This is wisdom. Knowing when to speak, when to hold, knowing that a calm presence can reveal far more than a brilliant performance. So ask yourself, how many times in your life have you worked to prove your value? Not because it was necessary, but because you were afraid not to? In arguments, at school, in relationships, in careers? How often did you feel the urge to impress, just to avoid being overlooked? And now ask, did any of it truly bring you peace? The brutal answer, probably not. Schopenhauer argued that human suffering is largely rooted in this obsession with status, opinion, and performance. The more we chase validation, the more we hand our emotional stability to others. But when we stop needing to be admired, we start seeing clearly. When we let go of the hunger for recognition, we step out of the game. And that's where the real shift begins. Because the fool, the one who doesn't rush to speak, who doesn't need to correct, who watches from the edge of the circle, that person is not weak. They are unbothered. They are free. And that kind of freedom is terrifying to those still trapped in the loop of proving and pleasing. In fact, this is why many people react so strongly to those who appear indifferent, because deep down, they envy the quiet power of someone who doesn't need to be admired to feel worthy. It's a paradox. The person most desperate to be seen is often the least secure. The person most underestimated is often the one with the clearest mind. And here's the deeper truth. Real intelligence doesn't need to be loud. Real power doesn't need to be seen. It needs no permission, no applause. It only needs time and silence to move. Think about Diogenes, the philosopher who lived in a barrel, owned nothing, mocked conventions. When Alexander the Great visited and offered to grant any wish, Diogenes didn't kneel. He didn't flatter. He simply said, "Move. You're blocking my sunlight." That is someone who cannot be controlled by illusion. He wasn't playing the fool. He had mastered it. And so can you. Because playing the fool lying strategically isn't about being passive. It's about seeing clearly. It's about conserving energy for what actually matters. It's a refusal to waste your life in ego competitions that lead nowhere. In the next part, we'll take this deeper. We'll talk about what it means to not just outmaneuver others, but to outgrow the entire need for approval, and how this shift leads to something far more powerful than influence: psychological sovereignty. So what happens when you no longer need to prove yourself? When you stop entering the contest no one asked you to join? When you can be quiet in a room full of shouting egos, not because you don't have something to say, but because you no longer feel the need to say it. What happens is this: you gain power that no one can take from you. Not the kind that dominates, not the kind that crushes, but the kind that doesn't flinch. Schopenhauer wasn't interested in prestige. He was interested in freedom from illusion, especially the illusion that your worth is determined by how others see you. Once you see through that, something strange begins to happen. You start to watch instead of react. You observe without needing to correct. You realize that most people are busy trying to win conversations while you're busy trying to understand the game itself. There's something deeply peaceful and deeply unsettling to others about someone who isn't trying to impress, because that person can't be predicted. They can't be baited. They don't chase, and so they can't be manipulated. They're not out of the game. They're simply playing a higher one. This is where the power of playing the fool transforms into something far more profound. It's no longer just a tactic. It becomes a kind of psychological transcendence. Because when you stop caring about appearing intelligent, something incredible happens. You begin to think clearly. You're no longer building sentences in your head just to sound smart. You're not chasing approval with every thought. You stop filtering your insight through the lens of social currency. You don't need the performance anymore. And in that quiet space, between the need to speak and the power to remain still, is where real wisdom lives. Lao Tzu once said, "He who knows does not speak. He who speaks does not know." That's not about silence for silence's sake. It's about recognizing the strength in self-containment, in not leaking your energy just to be heard. But let's be clear, this path is not easy. It will be misunderstood. People may assume you're weak, passive, naive. Let them. That's part of the design. Because while they're projecting, you're preparing. While they're competing, you're conserving. While they're revealing, you're learning. There's a line from Zen philosophy that says, "A fool who knows he is a fool is truly wise. A fool who thinks he is wise is truly a fool." This is not about self-deprecation. It's about the freedom of not needing to be seen as the expert, the authority, the sharpest person in the room. Because truthfully, The smartest people in the room are often the quietest, not because they lack insight, but because they have nothing to prove. And the more you live this way, the more you'll realize how much energy is wasted trying to win battles that don't matter. You stop correcting every false opinion. You stop responding to every provocation. You stop feeling the need to jump into every conversation just to leave your mark. And ironically, that's when people start to really notice you. When you're no longer trying to be seen, you become impossible to ignore. This is the paradox of power. When you no longer need recognition, you begin to radiate quiet authority. It's the kind that doesn't beg to be followed, but still sets the tone. And if you look at the greatest thinkers, mystics, and strategists throughout history, they all touch this truth. They understood the social game, but they didn't play it like everyone else. They weren't trying to beat others. They were trying to exit the loop of approval-seeking, image-curating, ego-feeding nonsense that keeps most people trapped for a lifetime. So what does this mean for you? It means the next time you're in a room full of performers, stay grounded. The next time someone talks down to you, don't rise to the bait. Let them underestimate you. Let them assume. Because when they see a fool, and you're the one quietly holding the truth, you win without playing the game. And yes, there will be times when you do need to step forward, to lead, to speak, to show your brilliance. But you'll do it by choice, not compulsion, from control, not craving. This is what Schopenhauer saw. This is what the Stoics lived. This is what every person seeking real inner peace must eventually face. You will never be free until you stop needing to be impressive. So the next time someone underestimates you, let them. Smile, stay still. Let the noise pass. And when it matters, move with precision, not performance, because the fool is not always the weakest player. Sometimes the fool is the only one awake.